Okay, I appreciate everybody's time today for the work session. We'll consider two different items. The first one will be the Hamilton Place case that has come to us back to us from the Planning Commission. Remember, City Council, that this is a time for you to ask questions and us to receive the answer to those questions. It is not a time for us to deliberate on anything that we're talking about today. There are people from the public that are watching and listening to us today, but this is a work session for the City Council and they will not be participating actively. But I thank everybody for your time. Thank you, Megan, for all the staff's time to help put this together, and let's be as efficient and effective as possible. So we're going to start with Hamilton Place. Ms. Crouch.
All right, we'll have Katie Robinson is just going to present to you what the latest is of the Plan Development District Amendment and conditional use request from a little bit slightly revised Hamilton Place. And we'll take your questions. If you've got a burning one during it, it's fine. And she's just going to go through what you previously saw and kind of what's different. So go ahead, Katie, if you're ready.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. So the Hamilton Place PDD amendment is proposed to include the addition of 4.21 acres into the PDD. They are adding two new land uses into the PDD, a community shopping center and office, and also adding one public street. As everybody knows, the property is at the intersection of Hamilton and Moores Mill Roads, zoned PDD with the underlying LDD. The original MDP contains 11.77 acres and is classified as a neighborhood shopping center. Within that neighborhood shopping center, the current uses that they have approved are a retail, grocery store, and a gas station. The maximum floor area allowed for a neighborhood shopping center is 100,000 square feet, and they are currently at 84,787 square feet. The proposed amendment would include this 4.21 acres here, add the 33,000 square feet of office space in this area here. And because that 33,000 square foot office space addition trips the neighborhood shopping center classification to the next shopping center classification of community shopping center, that is allowed up to 499,999 square feet of floor area. Here is an aerial of the property.
Katie, real quick on that though, I think it's important that you clarify that while it allows up to that, they could not add anything other than this office.
That is absolutely correct. So
this approval process, that's just a classification in the zoning ordinance, because I think that was confusing the last time the council heard this item.
Yes, and I'll get more into that when it gets to the conditional use.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
But with the approval of a PDD, the maximum floor area is limited to what is approved. So if you guys approve this, sorry. My keyboard is not working. All right, so if this is approved, their maximum floor area, they would be limited to that 117,787 square feet. Here is the street network that has been added. It's limited to, I mean, it's just one street, but it's still a network, I guess. And there are 3 parcels now, or lots, as previously it was just one lot and there was no public street with the last submittal. Here's an aerial of the property and the location of where the office and street would be located. And that is it in a nutshell for the PDD amendment.
And Katie, Planning Commission recommended denial of the PDD amendment, is that correct?
So the Planning Commission unanimously recommended denial of the PDD amendment because of the addition of the street. They are okay with the use of the property as an office use and a community shopping center. However, their main reasoning for denying the PDD amendment was because of that new public street that was added.
And Katie, street layout is part of a PDD approval, right?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Street layouts are established in plan development district approvals.
That's absolutely correct. Anytime there is any kind of change in land uses, an addition of a land use, removal of a land use, and/or public streets, that causes a plan development district or a master development plan to be amended.
Megan, can you tell me the responsibility, the liability that the city has with a public street versus a non-public street?
I'll have Allison Fraser, the city engineer, is available. She can talk a little bit about this. I think for some background, remember you went through that the city council did not vote in favor of the previous plan development district. And that had, and Katie can circle with her mouse, had a connection really coming through to the back of Publix. So the zoning ordinance states you can only rehear something if it's a substantial amendment. Otherwise, you have to wait 1 year from the time the process started. So the applicants came back and asked Planning Commission to rehear this, and their substantial amendment was not shifting, but adding a public street. The reason for adding the public street was in that specific location, which as you can see is offset from Bentbrook Drive. And the reason that they submitted it this way is they have to space, and Allison will get into this, between the cul-de-sac they're proposing and the curb cut at Publix has to have a minimum distance to meet a requirement to be a public street. Allison will also give you a little more information that it being a public street, this is not the type of public street the city normally allows during subdivision actions, because it's a cul-de-sac specific to a commercial or office type development that is not a need for the public to have to typically maintain it. We would have to, once it's turned over to us after a 1 year warranty, the city would be fully responsible for all maintenance of the street sweeping, repaving, all of those things. And normally entities like this have private streets, but the applicant is submitting it in this manner, trying to make it work. And that is why they submitted it this way. Allison can give you a little more from a traffic engineering standpoint about where she sits on this.
Yeah, the roadway now is proposed is offset about
18 to 24.
it's 18 to 24 feet offset from Bentbrook Drive. So if you are, this is Bentbrook Drive. So this road is offset. So if one were to try to access the new proposed public street, they would actually be blocking potentially someone trying to exit Bentbrook and causing the vehicles on Bentbrook to have to wait. That distance that Megan was mentioning, there isn't a requirement in our manual that the distance from a curb cut to a public right of way is 125 feet in a commercial setting, which is what prompted the applicant to submit this with this offset. Mayor Anders, to answer your question, the liability difference between a public street and a private street, if it's a private street, the city has no responsibility, no liability, no maintenance responsibility. The developer or condo association or whomever would actually own and maintain that roadway. With it being a public street, as Megan mentioned, the city would be on the hook for any maintenance responsibility, patching potholes, repairing curb. If this street were developed as a public street, it would have to have sidewalk as well as street lighting. And all of those things would have to be maintained by the city in perpetuity.
Allison, did you speak to this versus the connection to Hamilton Place in terms of how it offsets from Bent Brook? And there's a lot of questions the council previously had in the other iteration about how this aligns or doesn't align, and where, from a traffic engineering and safety standpoint, what do you think?
Yeah, from a traffic engineering standpoint, with it being offset, you do, like I said, you do have a conflict. You'll create an additional conflict with turning vehicles into the development with the Bent Brook traffic. But the other thing, from a practical perspective, if you're at Bent Brook, you now have to look in 3 different directions really to exit your development, versus in the previous iteration, with this access not being there, you essentially look right or look left to exit. This creates an additional conflict point for the residents of Bent Brook. If you'll remember, we did do accident analysis, speed study, and sight distance analysis on the prior iteration without this proposed access, and did not find any significant issues with just a single access and connection to the rear publics.
Okay, Mary, do you want to go over the conditional use?
Yep, that'll be fine. Yep.
We'll get to the conditional use, then we can take any further questions. Katie?
Sure. So as I somewhat mentioned in the PDD amendment case, the conditional use aspect of the proposal is the 33,000 square feet of office use, as well as that 117,000 plus square feet of the community shopping center. Here's the layout of the MGP again, and a zoom in of that site plan. The Planning Commission voted to approve, excuse me, this item with a vote of 7-2, and limited the amount of office space and community shopping center to that 117,000 square feet. They also wanted to add additional measures to limit the impervious surface and to provide natural filtration of runoff via a rain garden or another method that was recommended. And of course, because this is on a corridor street, the building materials and mechanical equipment, everything would have to fall within the corridor overlay regulations. And like I said, there was really no heartburn with the use. It was strictly the street that was tied with the PDD.
So the specific statement of the resolution was the site should not be designed in accordance with the submitted site plan that shows the proposed street offset from Bent Brook Drive. And while that was a condition they proposed, it's up to the council. Should you approve the PDD, how you feel about the conditional use. The challenge is you cannot eliminate this public street and go back to the previous iteration that you voted on several months ago, because that cannot be reheard until August of this year.
That's correct.
All right.
So I guess in other words, not to put many words in Planning Commission's mouth, they're okay with the use, but not okay with the offset street, minus some other conditions.
That's fair.
All right. Anybody on the council have a question for Megan or Katie? Could they ask a question of Katie as well?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, or Allison, I guess. Anybody on the council?
I have a question.
Sure, Connie, go ahead.
Okay, so this is the same thing that we voted on, I guess, a while back, and I can't remember actually what we were voting on at the time. But this is the property in the back of Publix on Moore's Mill Road, right?
Correct.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so can you just, you don't have to, give a long spiel, but what was it that we actually voted during that time? I just can't remember what it exactly was.
Katie, do you want to take that or you want me to?
If you want to, I mean, I don't remember the specifics as far as how much square feet were included in that original.
What the difference was really, Connie, is, Katie, can you circle where the Publix driveway, the back driveway right there? The applicant at the time was proposing to use that as the only ingress and egress, the only way to get in and out of this property. And the city council denied their ability to use that. So what that means is, per the zoning ordinance, you cannot rehear the same case if you get denied for 1 year from when you first submitted to planning commission. So they first submitted in, I believe it was August 2020. City council denied that. They can't come back with the same plan to use that curb cut until August of 2021. What they could do is ask for a planning commission to allow them to come back if planning commission deemed a substantive change, or was it called substantive, Katie? It's something else. It's
Substantive change.
Substantive change. And so planning commission deemed, yes, they would rehear this, that it's substantive enough to rehear. If I could speak today, that'd be very helpful, but not enough. They didn't say just because we rehear this, we approve it. And when it got to planning commission, they had big concerns about this public street and how it is offset. And among other things, they talked a lot about use and land use and so on, but ultimately the PDD denial had a lot to do with the recommendation of denial at the offset street. So Connie, yeah, you voted, if you see on your screen, the driveway to the left, the council majority voted to not allow that to be used for access to this. So the applicant came back and said, okay, we'll build a public street, but because of city requirements, the public street also can't align with Bent Brook Drive.
Right, and
Okay.
maybe,
So we did not deny the development itself. We just denied that that area right there that
You
y'all
did
had.
deny the development itself because of the access.
Oh, okay.
And that was back in November of last year. And then the request for a rehearing to the planning commission was in December of last year.
Oh, okay. I'm understood now. It's understood what we actually talking about today. Okay.
Thank you, Connie. Anybody else of the council have a question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
This is on the conservation overlay as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and the proposed rain garden or whatever this thing is that in lieu of a detention pond? I think we had a detention pond on the previous submission.
That's in addition.
So,
they would have to meet water quality and water quantity standards. The quality would be your rain garden or bioswales or any of those things. Your quantity would be your detention or some kind of underground storage system. So they would still have to meet both of those requirements for this zone and for the watershed.
okay, has that been considered so far, or is it still supposition on their part?
It's at this point, in a conditional use or amendment, they provide an engineering certification to us, which says they can engineer it if the item is approved. So it's a little premature at this point, but I'm sure that's something they can handle once design is started.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
I do have a couple.
Sure.
It looks like on the actual Moores Mill Road in front of this proposed street that we have, if you're traveling eastbound, a left turn only lane, and then we've created a median that would then be further east of that. Is that correct? To help?
Yes. So they would have to widen Moores Mill Road to accommodate, and I think what you're seeing is actually,
It's not a median. Is it a multi-directional turn lane, Allison?
well, it would be what's left after they widen and
Okay.
taper back down to existing pavement. So I think what you're seeing, this gray is actually the old right. Megan's rubbed off on me. The old right turn into this drive. So that's the shading you see. So they would actually have to build a right turn deceleration lane into the proposed street. But in accommodating a left turn lane into that street, they would have to widen Moore's Mill Road. So once they widen and have to taper it back down to 2 lanes, that's what you see right there. You're calling it a median, but yeah, it's actually just going to be pavement that tapers down.
Okay. And then, so would they be paying for all those improvements?
Yes, they would.
And they would be paying for the improvements of a proposed public street, but then after 1 year, we take over the maintenance of that?
That's correct.
Okay.
After 1 year after the wearing surface is placed. So that could be in 1 year or it could be in 2 or 3 years. But yes, 1 year after the wearing surface is placed and they're finished.
In English, the wearing surface is the final inch of asphalt.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got some
Okay.
places that still need a last,
Yeah.
for all my Tivoli people out there, I know it, so just a little slide that in there. And then what type of neighbor comments did we receive on this amended PDD?
I believe that there were only 2 neighbors that spoke regarding the PDD. And I didn't write down what they said, but I just wrote down who they were. But you want to go ahead, Alice, because it's
Yeah, I've got,
mostly it was involving the street offset.
right. Yeah, one of the residents mentioned safety concerns of a commercial development versus residential. And then the change in the type of shopping center, and that's more of a zoning thing. But nothing else significant.
And what was the purpose of them dividing it into 3 lots?
I mean, that could have been another change to the concept plan, to the proposal,
For maybe ownership?
possibly.
Okay.
Yeah, the public right of way gives them flexibility to do that. It doesn't change or affect anything on our side.
No.
though, as far as approval or zoning or infrastructure.
And as a council, as a conditional use, are we allowed to recommend aligning those streets, or is that something that we cannot do because of requirements of?
Yeah, it runs afoul of other requirements and other city laws and regulations, so you cannot then require that they align because it's breaking other rules. There were 2 citizens, it was Bob Greenhaw at 2486 Glenbrook Drive was opposed. This is per the Planning Commission minutes, and Gregory Forthoffer at 2547 Glenbrook Drive was opposed.
Right.
And this will be on our Tuesday agenda?
Yes, it will. So the other nuance with this is Planning Commission had to act on the conditional use even though they recommended denial of the PDD because the council is the final authority on the plan development district. If you were to approve the plan development district, then you will hear the conditional use later on. If you were not to approve the plan development district, then the conditional use will not be heard later in the agenda, obviously. And that, I think, is what happened at your first go around with this.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify. I mean, I guess we added this street, and forgive me for kind of bulling this down. I mean, I feel like in response to the citizens' concerns for the entrance, the offset entrance at the existing Publix loading area, I mean, that this street was added to at least try to get them lined up, which I think was a pretty substantial request from the people we heard from in Bent Brook. So I feel like that's why we're here, I guess, if I may speculate, why they added the street. But why would this proposed be public and not private?
Allison, you want to explain?
So that's a good question. The reason for it to be public is they get to take advantage of a lesser curb cut spacing. So the distance between a public street and the public's driveway is only required to be 125 feet. If they were proposing a non-public street or just a standard driveway, the distance would be in excess of 400 feet based on the classification and speed of Morris Mill Road.
And getting it further east, in essence, that's always hard for me. Right is east and left is west in this instance, but you think it's south of the interstate, so it'll confuse everyone. But further east, if you'll notice, there's other environmental challenges that can't go in there. There was the option to ask that curb cut spacing be waived. That waiver was never submitted to the city engineer. Is that correct, Allison?
That's correct.
So your first set of appeal is to the city engineer of that standard. Depending on how she rules, if she were to deny that, then it is appealed to the planning commission. That's how that manual works. That was not exhaustive, but I also believe, in talking with the applicants too, they pretty much felt strongly that the city engineer would deny it. So Allison did not get a chance to review it in that form, but I think they didn't want to go through paperwork to go through paperwork. And this is because of design of roads, and we have pretty tough standards on curb cuts due to rear end accidents and other challenges that we have. And we do encourage cross access. So, but Jay, yeah, the only way this fits is it fits offset to meet other city standards.
Right, and that's right. So it is offset from Bent Brook, but it's less offset because it's a public street. And so it was an attempt to at least get it as close to aligned as possible, right? I mean, that's a fair assumption.
I think that's a fair assumption, yes. Because again, if they were to align it with Bent Brook, they would then make the existing public's curb cut non-conforming and create.
Right. So I mean, this is the closest curb cut that we could get to aligning with Bent Brook.
Yes.
Right.
The challenge for Bent Brook is this offset is closer. So when they're looking to turn left to go into town, it's going to be very hard to see cars coming out of there.
Well, but if there's a car in the left-hand turn lane, you're not going to pull out of Bent Brook anyway, whether that's dead in front of you or to your left a little bit.
No, what I'm saying is if a car is coming out of the new development and turning right and you're looking right and you're looking left to make sure you can go and that car turns out, they have a hard time seeing them as well. It's what Allison was saying. There is one more direction to contend with to keep an eye on. Just to clarify, the other offset was a little bit further away. And how the council feels about it is absolutely how you feel about it. It's just this one's offset slightly in a different direction.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Yes, I have one more, please.
Sure.
If we were to approve all this as part of the PDD, could they move the existing public's curb cut closer to the intersection, the main intersection, to the left, or what is that, east, west? But it's west.
Yes.
Towards
Could they move
the,
No, that aligns with the back of the building. That's for semi trucks. Katie, can you go to a different drawing?
Sure.
Publics would they would have to agree to it. They do own that center, but you can go back to the master plan because you can see the building on there is fine. See how that goes straight back? That's for, the trucks use that and you don't then have them turn in and have to wind around the building. So it doesn't, even if, they could choose to agree to it, but that's typically not what happens.
Okay, so if they don't do that, then basically we don't have much choice because what's been proposed is not in compliance with the traffic regulations.
Allison, you want to handle that? What's proposed does meet a spacing requirement, but typically, and I want Allison to weigh back in, but typically we do not accept public rights of way just for one office use like that. That's the difference. That's just a matter of policy. Allison?
Yes. It is very atypical to have a public street we would classify this as a single lot development under normal circumstances. So having public infrastructure inside of a development of this nature is very unusual. So yeah, to Megan's point, if and I lost my train of thought. I guess I'm through, just lost it.
Well, I think it's just important is Councilman Griswold just asking, hey, does this meet city standards? The spacing absolutely does. And do they have the right to ask for that? They do. As a matter of policy, staff is telling me that we have turned down others before for wanting a public street. They're not a private street. And even to Councilman Hovey's point, the developer was doing what they could to comply. And that is where this stands. So I can't say it's not in compliance, but it's out of what normal policy is for a public street.
All righty, anyone else? Okay, let's move into short-term rentals. We've got 1 hour.
All right, we have 1 hour for short-term rentals.
We do.
Yeah, I just want to say real quickly that I'm heading out.
Okay.
I will be using myself on this vote, so I'm gonna hop off now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. That was Councilman Stephen Dixon, who will not be participating in the short-term rentals discussion, nor will he be voting on this item next Tuesday night. Just a reminder to our community, you might be listening, and the city council. This is a very difficult subject. It's very fluid. And this is the first time that the city of Auburn has ever considered an ordinance for this. I appreciate all of the investment of time and effort from staff and from the public. And, you know, I think frankly, if it wasn't for COVID, we would be past this now and we would have something in place, but that hasn't been what's happened. And so now we're starting to come up with something that's very, there's a lot of passion about it and a lot of interest in it. And we've never done this before, so we have no background to work off of. And so we got to dig in here for Tuesday night. Today is the time for questions from the council. I certainly don't expect in 1 hour that we're going to get all of those answered. I've encouraged all y'all through email to follow up with the staff and get all the questions answered that you need as we work towards next Tuesday night. We do meet again on Friday for a work session that goes over the agenda. If there's extra time we need to create for this type of activity, then we can certainly consider that as well. But I do appreciate everybody's willingness to be here today to get as informed as possible as we work towards Tuesday night. Ms. Crouch?
All right, Katie's going to go over the presentation the Planning Commission saw. Just I want to make sure you're getting the same presentation, and she'll also be going over a few proposed changes that they made. I think one key point to come out here is there's a lot of questions about short-term rentals and what is the staff enforcing or not enforcing. Katie will give some background, but fact of the matter is without a short-term rental law on the books, some sort of ordinance, we are left to only enforce the laws we do have on the books, which are mainly nuisance laws and unrelated occupancy. So until something gets on the books that directly addresses short-term rentals, staff does not have a good mechanism to enforce and cite people. Yes, we have a lot of correspondence from citizens, and we have our own software company that is telling us who we think is doing it, who's advertising, but until there's a law on the books to contact people and say you're doing this, you're either lawful or not lawful, we have no other main mechanism to enforce it, so it makes it challenging. So keep that in the back of your mind as we move through. Katie?
Right. So there will be two types of short-term rentals that I will go over this afternoon. One is homestays and the other is short-term non-primary rentals. But starting from the beginning, we have been discussing short-term rentals and contemplating what we want in regulations since the fall of 2017. And this was due to an uptick in the number of complaints that we began to receive in about 2013. And really, the only enforcement that we could do at that point was really based on our unrelated occupancy ordinance. And it was very challenging for us to prove that there was any type of unrelated occupancy violation because of the rentals being so short, and we did not have time to determine that there was a violation going on. So in the fall of 2017, an internal working group was formed to discuss what we wanted to see in these types of regulations to better govern this type of activity. So in the spring of 18, the first draft was written and given to the internal group and reviewed. And then in May of that year, presented to the Planning Commission at a work session. Now, in the fall of 2018, Mayor Anders formed the short-term rental task force, in addition to the other task forces that he created at that time and appointed. And in December, I believe, of 19, the Planning Commission held their first work session after the creation of the short-term rental task force. So between December of, well, I'm sorry, let me get back to the short-term rental task force. Several work sessions were held, and 2 of those were attended by the public based on the comments of what they wanted to see in the ordinance. Those were presented to staff. The first draft was amended and presented on the website, and the public were able to go in and comment on that second draft, which was done in April, I believe, of 2019. The final public work session was done in August of 2019, and going back through and researching all of this, there had been 6 iterations of the ordinance, at least, that I have documented. So at the conclusion of the short-term rental task force, which was in October, they provided planning their list of recommendations, and those were revised according to what the short-term rental task force wanted to see, what they heard from the public. So it was after then that it was kicked back to the Planning Commission, and they held their work sessions based on the recommendations from the task force. 4 work sessions were held from December of 19 to October of this past year. And let's see. Of course, the regulations that have been drafted, several benchmarking and input sessions had been had. This just goes through the communities that we used to look at similar ordinances that they had already created, and goes through the timeline that I just went through. And the final recommendations come into the development of additional definitions that were proposed to be included in the zoning ordinance. The first one, adding the neighborhood redevelopment district, and the corridor redevelopment district, both west of Donahue, as being included in that family definition. And so, a family definition is any members of a family related by blood, marriage, adoption, guardianship, etc., plus one unrelated individual. So that is a family. And the zoning districts where family applies are NC, LDD, DDH, the new large lot residential district, and then the two that I just mentioned. These definitions were also incorporated, defining what a homestay is, which is a home occupation in which someone owns their home and uses it as their permanent residence, and they hire out their dwelling or any portion thereof as lodging. We've talked about residential occupancy within the department for years. However, there's never been a definition. So it just ties back to the definition of family, referring to who resides in one dwelling unit. Transient occupancy was included in the draft agenda, in the draft ordinance, I think in the 4th revision of the ordinance. And it just speaks to the number of nights that you can reside somewhere when a fee is being charged for that. A permanent residence is defined as residential occupancy of a dwelling by the same individual or individuals for a period of more than 180 consecutive days. And of course, all of these items here, motor vehicle registration, driver's license, voter registration, all tie back to that address. Short-term non-primary rental is a dwelling unit that is not your permanent residence and that can be leased in its whole house to one party for a period of less than 30 consecutive days. So then we get into the details of homestays and short-term non-primary rentals. The text you see in red is what the Planning Commission has recommended to be eliminated from the draft ordinance, from the proposed ordinance. And where you see red text in bold followed by black text in bold, that is language that has changed or they have proposed to change. So basically, a homestay is allowed in any of the zoning districts that allow up to 5 unrelated individuals. They are required to have a home occupation.
Okay, your home occupation is just a type of business license, meaning for.
That's correct. We allow residents to work out of their home. And we issue a home occupation to them, and then finance would issue the business license based on home occupation. So originally, no more than 6 overnight guests were allowed to stay in a homestay, which this is in red. So the Planning Commission has amended our proposal to eliminate this requirement. The homestay may operate no more than 120 days when the homeowner is not present. The language that was presented, it says when the residence is not owner occupied. As I was going through all of these changes, to me, that just sounded like it was, I don't know, you're already saying that a homestay has to be owner occupied. So this was just confusing to me. So I suggested changing that to when the owner of the residence is not present during the leasing. And then of course, this portion of the text in red, delete altogether, because in one version of the draft, Homestays were allowed in some zoning districts and not allowed in others. But all of these up here that are allowed are the same that's shown here. And just to streamline it and not to add any confusion, I thought it would be best to eliminate that from the proposal. Of course, no food can be prepared for the guests that are staying there. And then in E and F, just changing where it says zoning certificate, which is another license or another approval that planning does that signifies to revenue that a business license is needed and is okay at an address. Because this relates to a home occupation and it's a separate license or approval from that we issue, we're just replacing zoning certificate with home occupation. So that's the only change there. The home occupation for a homestay is only valid for 1 calendar year. It must be renewed yearly. And of course, the homeowner must be present in the dwelling 180 days of the year so that it qualifies as their permanent residence. And then subsection F just talks about the enforcement and how the homestay could be revoked by the planning director in the event that there are 3 substantiated complaints received by the city within that calendar year, or if they fail to maintain compliance with any of the regulations set forth, not only in the homestay portion of a home occupation, but in the other regulations that are over home occupations, excuse me. And then the third one is that it could be revoked. Let me see if I can move this. Uh-oh.
It's revoked for the year that you're in plus the following year.
That's correct. It would be revoked for the remaining portion of that year and the following year. So that's homestays. Short-term non-primary rental is not as verbose as this. So the table of permitted uses would allow a short-term non-primary rental as a special residential use in all of the zones that homestays are allowed in. I think it being included in the South College Corridor District, the SCCD, was an oversight on our part in one of the versions. So my suggestion and the Planning Commission's recommendation was to eliminate this zone to allow for short-term non-primary rentals. So in this type of short-term rental, a short-term non-primary is limited in operation to 240 calendar days. A zoning certificate is required yearly. And the same as a homestay, it can be revoked the same way that a homestay could if there are 3 substantiated complaints. If they fail to maintain compliance with the zoning ordinance, or in the same thing, if it gets revoked at some point during that year, the following year would also apply and would not be able to have a short-term non-primary then. This is the map that was created that shows where short-term rentals, both homestays and the STNPRs are allowed. And that's all in the green areas where they are allowed by right. And as mentioned before, that's all of the zoning districts that allow up to the 5 unrelated individuals. I created this chart, this table for the Planning Commission, just so you can see the differences and really the similarities in the two of these uses side by side. It tells you that the short-term non-primary is not a person's permanent residence, and they can lease it to a party for no more than 30 consecutive days, whereas a homestay is a person or persons permanent residence. And to qualify as a permanent residence, that person or persons must reside there for 180 days per calendar year. The zoning districts remain the same. They're allowed in urban core, all of the urban neighborhood districts, CDD, RDD, the MDRD, rural, all of the corridor redevelopment districts, except for the CRDW west of Donahue, the NRD west of Donahue. These are showing where they are allowed. And of course, the SCCD was suggested to be removed by the Planning Commission. Both types of short-term rentals are prohibited in all of the zoning districts that are limited to family as their residential occupancy. NC, DDH, LDD, LLRD, NRD, and CRDW west of Donahue. The STNPR would be classified as a special residential use in the table of permitted uses. Homestays is only allowed in conjunction with a home occupation. They both require yearly permitting. The homeowner does not have to be present during the rental activity of an STNPR and are limited to 240 days. There's no limitation to the number of guests, whereas homestays are required the homeowner to be there no fewer than 120 days per calendar year. There's no limitation on the number of days that they can rent, because that homeowner would have to be there the other portion of the year when they're not there that 120 days. And then the Planning Commission recommended to eliminate this limitation, limiting guests in homestays to 6. And that is it. I will be happy to answer any questions you guys have. I know you probably have many.
Katie, real quick though, the main difference between the two is one is your homestead and likely where you're getting your homestead exemption, or should be, it's your permanent residence. And the other is likely to be an investment property.
Right, yes.
And that's the key difference. They track the same at zones and virtually everything else based on Planning Commission's recommendations, other than the 120 days per calendar year for a homestay where you've got to be there.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Katie. My first question, Megan, is to the council. So anything we adopt, I think we have to be cognizant this has to be enforced. And the city has never enforced, obviously, this ordinance before. This law, because we've never had it. We've enforced nuisance types of things. But this would raise the bar, I think, even higher. So, Megan, I just think about the primary time when we're having short-term rental activity is more than likely football weekends, when there's a lot of people in town, and we've got, our public safety people are conducting a lot of work and effort and strategy on our part to keep us safe. And I just think about what is, people start filing calls and concerns about what their neighbor might be doing. And so how do you see that being enforced, just in general?
Well, I think generally speaking, it's a two-stage process. I had sent the council some information about host compliance, which is a database that monitors short-term rentals, which we've discussed before. and say they're giving us data that on a daily basis it changes, but say we have about 300 active short-term rentals in the city that are actively listed right now. You know, the first phase rollout would be, we would contact everybody in that database based on what the council decides and say, hey, you either need to get a license or you need to cease and desist your short-term rentals because you're in an area that it's not allowed. From there, you know, there's got to be a little bit of a period. I know there's been a lot of public sentiment about no grace period. Well, you can't pass an ordinance on a Tuesday and us be out enforcing on a Wednesday. We've got legal advertising requirements, but we also need to give people the opportunity to either stop doing what they're doing if they're not supposed to be doing it, or to get licensed, because those who are inappropriate zones, whatever those are decided to be, need an opportunity to get licensed. So we've got an initial rollout that will have to happen. There's letter writing, city controls, all that messaging. That would be phase one. But assuming all that's happened and we're getting into, you have an ordinance, how are we enforcing it? Right now, the police enforce certain aspects, and it's not just short-term rentals, it's citywide. If there's a loud party going on and neighbors complain and they call the police go out and ask people to quiet down. If another call comes in and the police go out and find the noise is not stopped, then they will take further action depending on what they find. That wouldn't change with short-term rentals. What would change is we now have a database of who has a license. And if police are substantiating noise complaints, it wouldn't be the first visit, it would be the second visit where further action happens. Then staff would follow up the following week, tell somebody they have a strike, and we'd go on. When it comes to, I think my neighbor is doing this and I'm in an NC zone, if you choose to make it not lawful in an NC zone, we will have a phone number for people to call, just as we do for unrelated occupancy, but we're going to probably just set up a full short-term rental direct phone number where people will get calls. We'll likely have initially some folks on call that will have to go out and investigate and begin to substantiate complaints. The challenge that we have is Judge McLaughlin kind of determines how we can prosecute things and how we can cite people. So we have to be able to gain enough evidence to cite people to convict them if they are unlawfully operating a short-term rental. So what exactly that looks like, I need a law to tell you, but we think our inspection services staff, among some other staff, can handle the initial ramp up. I may need to add a position of another neighborhood inspector to help deal with this. The intent is the police will not be going out to unrelated occupancy complaints of somebody's illegally operating a short-term rental. They're out for, you're blocking cars and driveways and you're doing other things that are a general nuisance. The rest will be on the staff, and yes, it will be challenging the very first football season we go through this. Very challenging and take up a lot of staff time, but if we receive complaints or have information, we will follow up on them. That is, you know, the more complicated we make this ordinance, and I'll agree, a few people have asked questions, well, where do these days come from? And, you know, 120, 240, whatever, they were selected dates and numbers of days. And some of it is people don't typically do a short-term rental 365 days a year. That's a regular rental. And so those can be adjusted by the council if they see fit. But yes, you know, our citizens are going to expect full bore enforcement. It is not realistic to think that overnight we can stop every short-term rental that may not be lawfully operating, but we can certainly reach out and begin to enforce the law and take actions, but they will take time. And the first football season is going to be challenging. Also, our staff believes in our initial conversations, the rollout will be more challenging than the long term with this. And so we expect a different deal in the first year of operating this than it becomes in the long term. And we don't want to ramp up staff to deal with this in the long term because of a short term issue. So that's why I say I may need to add an additional neighborhood inspector, but they also have other things that they can be working on besides short term rentals.
One other question, I'll let the rest of the council. So in the non-primary areas and those that might be in commercial buildings that are either acting as apartments or they might have another commercial use that have a business permit or some type of license already, are we going to ask them to get another license for short-term rentals?
So I've got Allison Edge, our finance director, on because there's a lot that goes on with, we have a number of apartment complexes in town who do short-term rentals already, they report it as lodging tax. They do all kinds of things, but there's been some questions from some of them. Would they be required to get an additional license? Allison, can you weigh in, please?
Yeah, the answer to that is no, we would not require that. As long as their primary purpose remains long-term, and that's about 75% of gross receipts, then they would not be required to have a separate license. But any short-term rental, as Megan mentioned, would require that lodging tax be remitted for that.
And Allison, we have people that do that today. They're remitting both.
Yes.
Thank you, Allison. All right, council, any questions from the council?
I have a question, Mayor.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
I presume from the ordinance that planning is recommending that short-term rentals are okay in certain zones, but not others. But those types of zones share similar qualities. I know that in seeing a lot or reading a lot of the emails we've received, there's been a big issue with NC zoning, short-term, any kind of short-term rental in NC. I know because I live in an RDD that the makeup, the design, the structure of my neighborhood is similar, if not exactly same as many of the NC neighborhoods. When planning made that determination, what were they looking at? What was the determination that made? Because if we've got two different zones with similar characteristics in neighborhoods, but we're saying short-term rental's good here or fine here, but not here, what's the difference there? What do we determine as the difference?
So Brad, I'll have, we actually, listening out there, and why they cannot weigh in are a number of planning commissioners. They signed up to listen in. From the October 5th work session, they discussed this heavily, and Katie will weigh in as well if I get off course here. But their ultimate deal was in protection of single family neighborhoods, which has been a big issue with a lot of citizens. They opted that they wanted to track this specifically with the family definition. So anywhere up to 5 unrelated people are lawful living together in the city, they would track short-term rentals the same way, because people in Auburn, and yes, there are folks that don't know about the family definition. It tracks with zoning, period. And so Planning Commission, one of their final deliberations in October was, we don't want to pick and choose beyond the family definition which neighborhoods we'll just go ahead and include and which ones we won't. Staff cannot enforce an ordinance that doesn't follow by zone. We can't pick and choose neighborhoods. It needs to follow, if we're going to set this up following by zones as opposed to something citywide, then it has to track by zone. There have been some neighborhoods that have requested, Ashton Lakes went through a rezoning back in the fall to get out of the CDD base zone they had into DDH. They were able to do that. We've had some neighborhoods reach out that have planned development district overlays over zones that allow families or up to 5 unrelated. And in those neighborhoods are going to be more challenged to get their base zone changed because a planned development district is extremely complicated. In the case of neighborhood zone, CDD, RDD, and others, they do have the right to come and ask to be rezoned, but planning has to help analyze the conformity of them. It could challenge them. Ashton Lakes is a little bit fortunate in that it didn't make their properties non-compliant with some zoning ordinance things, but that was Planning Commission's angle. Is a lot of people had an interest in, and it's always been this way. Planning Commission's been staunch in my 23-year career here about protection of what's considered neighborhoods that go by the family definition. And that was their decision point at the time, knowing that they also needed to move this forward. And there wasn't a way outside of zoning to pick and choose who got to be in and who got to be out.
Okay, so it wasn't necessarily an idea of like, we've made a determination that there's extra nuisance, and we're gonna protect certain neighborhoods over other neighborhoods regarding.
No, and indeed, I'll have Greg, because you're looking at the recommendation summary. I'm going to have him switch the other map I promised you guys in an email. And again, to be clear to everyone, we will email this out to the council post meeting, and it'll appear on the city's STR page. Greg, can you control L? Mm-hmm. I think what's important, and kind of to Brett's point, is where are people doing this? The red dots are people that are we think they're potential short-term rentals, as in they show up in our database, but we have a lot of analyzing to do of, they may be short-term rentals and red dots in areas where the current ordinance as proposed, it would not be allowed, and the orange dots would be lawful. So you can see a pie chart at the bottom of the screen that says, of the 249, 107 would be lawful under the ordinance as proposed, and 142 would not be lawful. But that is showing you the different areas of town and where that would be. And it shows, it's kind of all over the city. And you guys saw something similar when you collectively as a group, when the task force was studying this, they saw something similar. And you can see it does cluster closer to campus and to downtown. And it is a mix of, the green areas are the permitted areas under the proposed ordinance, and the bluish gray ones, however you look at that color, would be the areas not permitted. And that's where you see it dashing all around. A lot of the green areas are the former or currently zoned comprehensive development district, CDD, and some of them have a CDD base zone with a PDD overlay.
All right, Brett, you got anything else, man?
I've got a few more, but if we're only rolling for an hour, I don't want to take up all the time.
Okay.
Let me ask one more real quick. We're
Sure.
talking about three strike penalties regarding short-term rentals. Do we do that same with like long-term rentals as well? Whereas if you're not in compliance, because I assume, and I know that the noise, trash, the three issues, the trash, traffic, and noise are not unique to STRs. Or in the unrelated occupancy, are not unique to STR. I know that happens in rental properties, and I know that happens in owned properties with neighbors. With the long-term rentals over 6 months or more, do we remove, or do we take business license or licenses from businesses if they hit a three-strike issue too?
No, there is no such rule on the books right now for any other thing other than proposed for this.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Brett. All right, next. Anyone?
Okay, well, I guess I do have some questions. I'm just not really familiar with this short-term rental or homestay. And just to be honest with you, I've never heard of it until I actually got on the council. So is all of this is just confusing to me, because homestay, when she was the homestay in the short term rental.
Connie, hold on just a second, Connie. Hey, Connie, we're having a difficult time understanding you.
We're also gonna have Katie put up the other chart back up if she can.
Okay.
Katie, can you put your end chart back up and share screen again? There we go. Go ahead, Connie.
All right, let's try again, Connie.
Okay. What I was saying was, and can you, is it noise, the reason why you can't hear me, or is it just that?
There's some feedback, but sometimes your voice does go in and out.
We can hear you for now, though.
Okay. Like I said, all of this is confusing to me. The short-term rentals, homestay, first time I ever heard it is when I got on the city council. So I'm real confused on all of this. But I do have some understanding, I guess, by this chart today, a little understanding of it. So we're trying to, as a council, we're trying to prohibit some of these from being in certain neighborhoods, but we're trying to keep them in other neighborhoods, is what I basically heard Brett say. I guess my question is, how did it really just become an issue if it has not been an issue in the past? I guess what I'm trying to say about where they're prohibited and not prohibited, or just something that came up recently?
Yeah, I'll take that, Connie. And I will tell you that on the previous council, which there's three of us, Beth and Tommy were on the previous council, we were beginning to hear these complaints. I think a few times they came to public hearings at the council, and then we received a number of emails about different things that were going on related to short-term rentals. It was growing. And so certainly I would say that after I was sworn in as mayor, I felt like it was something that we needed to have a policy on for our city, that we owed our residents and our community an ordinance, something we could live by, and something we could say we put our hat on and say, this is how we're going to govern this. And so that's why we're here today. But I think simply put, it came from complaints and concerns from citizens who were exposed to the poor side of the activity.
Okay, so now with that, and I'm just asking the question, okay, so instead of taking neighborhoods out, were there any type of restrictions at the time or permits at the time?
No, it was just as Megan said, it was enforced based on the nuisance laws of our city, based on too many cars in the driveway or in the front yard, too much trash and noise, a lot of noise concerns.
There's been a lot of concerns from residents who live adjacent to some of these, that their concerns are that people are using the house next door to me as a hotel. And I didn't sign up to live next to a hotel, in their opinion. So some of the complaints we're getting and frustration of residents in general about living next to a hotel, they feel strongly they purchased a home in a single family neighborhood, and that's what it should be for, is people to live there, whether it's rental or owner occupied, but they should be there longer term than over the weekend.
Okay. Well, okay. Maybe as we go on, I can understand it better. But I'm just not understanding. People, private residents, that we should be the ones that determine whether people can rent from. I guess our own resident. I guess that's the confusing part.
Yeah, we're losing you a little bit, Connie. I would say, as I said at the first of the meeting, as you continue to contemplate this tonight, tomorrow, do not hesitate to contact Megan and set up your own time to spend with her and ask all these questions yourself, okay?
Okay, that's fine.
Right. Next, anyone from the council?
Mayor, if I may.
Sure, Tommy, you're up.
First question I got is, have we researched other cities our size, particularly in the Southeastern Conference, to see what they're doing with this problem?
Absolutely, Tommy. A lot of the benchmarking that was done, the ordinance was loosely based, and no, it is not a Southeastern Conference school, and they did double dribble, but University of Virginia, Charlottesville, Virginia, it was loosely based off of them. They had a pretty solid ordinance, but most of the Southeastern schools were benchmarked at the time, and that's where Katie just put that up. And you can say why some of those things outside of the Southeastern Conference is because some of these were ahead of SEC schools dealing with it, and that's one of the reasons. Look, I'm from California, and Berkeley tends to do things a little bit differently than we do in Auburn, but it still gives you the gamut. And I think what Forrest Cotton at the time was looking for big and small to see what they do. Arroyo Grande, California, is also a beach community, so they're also benchmarking people that have been dealing with STRs for a long time. Others have been looked at since, but yes.
Okay, and I'm assuming we've talked with our legal counsel about all this to make sure.
Absolutely.
And I would like for someone with the city to research Austin, Texas, and what they possibly done. I heard that they, and I don't know if it's what the details of it, possibly they'd have one challenge to a higher court. I'd like to know if that happened and what the results of it were. And my big thing is I have a hard time telling anybody what they can do or can't do with their homestead in any neighborhood. But at the same time, what do you do? I mean, it's horrible for a resident who's been in a neighborhood for 50 years, and some of them have, some of them have contacted me. and all of a sudden they're elderly and they go out in their front yard and people are urinating and throwing trash and, you know, you can call the police, but I can tell you now on a Friday or Saturday night during the fall, the police are going from call to call. So it may take a little bit to get there. I do think if we enforce those laws as best we can eliminate some of this stuff. But I do like the idea of, you know, so many strikes and you're possibly out. But I think you ought to be allowed to do it if it's your homestead. If you got to live there with it, I think you're less likely to have these problems that you're having now in these neighborhoods.
Thank you, Chief. You done? You
Yeah.
good? Okay.
And since we were short on time, yes, I'm done for now.
Okay. All right. Next. Anyone else with a question? Hey, Connie, could you mute your computer? We're receiving a lot of feedback on this end.
There we go.
Thank you. All right. Council members, anybody else with a question?
Mayor, if I may.
Sure, Beth. Go ahead.
And I also respectfully ask that we don't hold to 5:30 if we don't get through all of our questions, just because this is important. Just asking for consideration.
You're considered.
Thank you. I do have a couple questions. One, if we could go to that side-by-side recommendation list slide would be great.
There we go.
Okay, so one question I had is more of a technical piece. On the yearly zoning certificate required and yearly home occupation required, should there be another word after home occupation like license, or because yearly home occupation?
Yeah, Beth, these are excerpts from the ordinance, and I would have to go back and look at the detail, and Katie can, but a couple of you have had questions, and it is a home occupation license, so we'll note that and verify one way or the other. And that is tracking, just to be clear, and Allison Ed will correct me if I'm wrong, we're just tracking with our pure business license year right there on the calendar year, like all businesses in the city must do.
Okay, and then are we proposing to add 3 zones to the single family definition by way of this ordinance?
We are including the NRD and the CRDW east of Donahue. The LLRD is not on there. Oh, wait, no, it's on the bottom. So the LLRD was added to that family definition when that zone was created. Back in the spring of last year, I believe. So that's already been done.
Okay, but the NRD and the CRD west of North Donahue Drive are not currently part of the single family definition?
West of Donahue.
Meaning, Beth, they are currently, they allow up to 5 unrelated.
Right. So my question is, if we were to pass this ordinance as presented, we would then in essence be adding 2 categories that would then have to then only be no more than 2 unrelated occupants.
No.
No.
Katie, this is tracking with the zoning ordinance except for rural. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'm checking the family definition. So I know in the description of zoning districts in Article 3, those do list occupancy limitations to the family definition for the NRD and CRDW west of Donahue. However, the family definition, I think, also lists the individual zones, and those must have been left out when the NRD and the CRDW were created. So that's kind of just a cleanup on this part.
Yeah, you're saying tracking in the definitions section, Katie, versus the section 3, the zone where the zones are defined, it's also limited in there.
That's correct.
Yeah, except for rural, Beth, and rural it's not defined one way or the other.
Okay. And speaking of rural, if you have an area that has, say, let's just say a neighborhood, Creekwood is one that has some split zoning, does it default to the more restrictive zone as far as this would be considered?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
Katie,
then-
you wanna, we handle that though, that's the same with all unrelated occupancy in the city, correct?
Right. The
Yes.
most restrictive residential occupancy would apply.
And then if you live in a neighborhood like myself that has an HOA or a POA, would those HOA or POAs be able to apply restrictions in their covenants that could prohibit short-term rentals, even if they fell into, say, a planned development district or a CDD zone, or any other zone for that matter?
So that would be a private matter, as the city does not enforce covenants or restrictions.
Okay, so but it would not preclude them from doing that.
No, not if the zoning ordinance allows it.
There just would be no enforcement from the city perspective, but only from
That's
the.
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And then do we have a gauge of how many rentals exist in zones that have the definition of a single family?
You know, the map that we flashed up, Beth, do you mean
Like long-term rentals?
No, because I talked to the finance director about this earlier today. It would be tremendous work. It depends on how the license is situated. We have rental companies, some of them we get laundry lists from, some we get a full remittance of a tax. Without tremendous amount of work and going back to everybody and getting a spreadsheet, no. We do not have that data. We do have the multifamily data that we did last year, but it has nothing to do with single family detached home rentals.
Okay. And then this is just kind of a out there question, but I feel it's important. If this ordinance were altered in any way, or in essence amended, or I don't know, but just forget, do we have the ability to place a cap on the number of short-term rentals that would be available in each zone in the city?
If you were to place a cap, we would really have to talk with legal counsel. 1, 2, you would then have to decide, how are you going to choose who gets licensed and when, and how does that go? Is that a lottery? Some cities, Nashville long ago just said per census block group, no more than 2 per census block group, and it was first come, first serve, and we have a line out the door of City Hall. Probably not recommended, but we would want to look at what we thought was enforceable with that. But if that's something the council wants to do, we can do it.
Okay. All right. And I know I'll have more when we have this in front of us, but that's what I have for now. Thank you.
Next.
As a follow-up on Beth's question, just out of clarity, on the zones regarding the unrelated occupancy, are we just cleaning up the prior ordinance, or are we actually adding new zones to the unrelated occupancy?
We are not, and I've checked the definition in section 2, and it specifies the zones that get up to 2 unrelated, and then it says all other zones can have up to 5 unrelated.
So the ones that in the changes to the proposed ordinance, that's not like, I'm thinking more of, once this gets in front of council, like that's a bigger issue than just short-term rentals, because that affects rentals in general and home ownership. If we're adding new zones to the unrelated occupancy portion.
You really aren't, other than Katie was right about, she said, I think it was, and I do need to stand corrected on it. I think it was the NRD, Katie, and one other. The definition in a different section makes it family, but it's not in the family definition itself. I still think it applies, and we'll double check with the city attorney. It's not something different than is listed in the zoning ordinance, in other words.
It's not in the family definition in this proposed ordinance, or it's not listed in ordinances we passed before?
So it is in section 3 of the zoning ordinance as the zone is defined. It tells you whether the family definition applies or not. But in Article 2 or Section 2, it is not. When you look at, that's the definition section. Some of those zones aren't listed under that definition. And that's just a cleanup item Katie mentioned. But, 2 unrelated or 5 unrelated is being enforced based on Section 3 right now, period.
And I'm being daft. I'm sorry. Right now in those areas, are more than 2 people allowed to occupy a home that are unrelated?
No, as this chart
Okay.
sits in here, no. I mean, this is accurate across the board and being applied unilaterally.
Okay. And one last little question. If in the instance that homestays were allowed in NC, is there a way to be like, if a person rented to one person, they would not be in violation of the unrelated occupancy and still could operate a homestay in an NC with one person at a time? Is that correct?
If this passed,
Not in the, if it were to be amended to allow, I'm just saying, is there a way to have a homestay and still be in line with the unrelated occupancy within, say, NC or some zone that
I
has?
think if you were to go there and have a homestay, I think there just has to be a way to bridge the gap with the family definition and acknowledge that gap. And that's what I'm not certain about, but we can check.
Okay, thank
I
you.
think what you're saying is if you were to permit homestays, in zones that the family definition currently applies, no more than 2 unrelated, how do those 2 work together?
That's
And
right.
can
That's
they-
exactly right.
Okay, let me get an answer. We've grappled with that before, but let me get some interpretation. Katie needs to weigh in, and so does the city attorney, and we'll get that before Tuesday.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Brett. Anyone else from council?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, go right ahead, Kelly.
Was there any discussion as to what a non-term primary rental owner is supposed to do for the remainder of the year? If he has a home that's basically a rental home, or, I mean, it's a neighborhood hotel there for 240 days, what's he supposed to do with the rest of the year?
I think
There was
If we were to
no
pass this immediately, Kelly, what's he do for the rest of the year? Is that what you're?
no, he's saying to 365 days. What happens to between 365 and 240,
Right.
the 125 days?
It said
And go ahead, Kelly.
I'm sorry, does that mean the house is going to sit empty in some of these neighborhoods?
Katie, you were answering
Right.
that.
I was just gonna say, it would be up to the homeowner. I mean, because it would essentially be an investment property. So it could either, the person who owns the house could live there, or it could be vacant. Or he could rent it 6 months to someone and then the rest of the time do the STNPRs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a number, Kelly, that can be adjusted if the council so chooses. Staff is not bent on that, and we would have to trust that people are reporting accurately and align that with the database that we have, which would be challenging.
Okay.
And I think you're also signaling, what about the enforceability of that? That is a challenge and admitted. So I think the notion was you don't typically lease exactly 100% of the days out of a year, even in a short-term rental, even in Gulf Shores or wherever.
Okay. And the other question I had was there discussion at planning about the 6 overnight guests in regards of, is that per unit, or is there a way to say 2 per bedroom or something? Because some places obviously are structured in such a way that they can accommodate, 15, 16 people. And other places are built where they only accommodate 2 overnight guests or something. Is the 6 a magic number, or is that based on the home, the family definition?
So the planning commission actually voted to remove, their recommendation was to remove
Right.
that limitation to the number of guests for homestays.
Okay. But there was discussion about it, I guess, well, there was.
About it being tied, original thought was, Kelly, you're right. It was, okay, it's 1 over, 5 is 5 unrelated is the max, and that's 1 over, so it's close. And that was the discussion that they had at the planning commission meeting in January.
Okay.
And then they just decided, does it really make sense if you're going to allow it, and especially when it's a homestay, if you're going to make it unlimited for an investment property, and if it's your homestay and you want to rent it to 18 people, that's your house.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next,
Hello, can you hear me?
we can hear you.
Hey, this is Bob. Hey, Megan, I wonder if you could provide this council with, I know you've been with the city a long time, but I know for sure you haven't were not with the city during the time that the zoning ordinance was created in the mid-'80s, but I'm very confident that you could probably supply us with a quick overview as to the purpose of why the zoning ordinance as we read it now is the way it is. Could you provide us with a quick overview and general purposes, the general purpose of a city zoning ordinance?
Well, I mean, yeah, you have a general purpose of it. We had a zoning ordinance before 1985. What we changed to, and we don't want to get into, all of our AICP, our American Institute of Certified Planner testing, but, zoning was originally created to be sure that there was air and light and other health, safety, welfare issues addressed, and it was kind of born out of New York. But when we roll it forward, Auburn long had a zoning ordinance that people felt was somewhat dysfunctional. And because we are a university community, we thought we would go to a new type of zoning in the middle 80s called performance zoning. And the theory in performance zoning was that all uses could basically coexist. And that is kind of to Councilman Smith's point about the comprehensive development district. That is, all uses could coexist in a zone from single family to light industrial. It's a function of landscaping, buffering, and setbacks. And that is ultimately in the middle 80s where we came to. One of the things, though, that was a big deal, that's how the DDH zone was created. We took existing neighborhoods that didn't want to be around this, mixed use zones and said, okay, we'll make those neighborhood conservation. Then we'll put a buffer strip around them. The buffer strip was DDH zone, which still basically required single family detached residential, but could conditionally get some multifamily, but at a lower density. And we put at least 400 feet around these NC neighborhoods of a buffer zone of DDH. And then we would do something like comprehensive development district. And then areas that looked like they needed to transition at the time were zoned redevelopment district, which had some more protections for existing homes. It was kind of a hybridized zone, but it's kind of where we got. And so there are people that live in Auburn that definitely have been here since the middle 80s and before, and they were big, and Warren McCord can speak to this as a longtime planning commissioner, was on the planning commission when we adopted that ordinance, is neighborhood conservation. And then we have other new iterations of it. LDD is one of them. We're meant to protect neighborhoods. And part of it was concern about encroachment of students. Not that students couldn't live among citizens, they can live anywhere they wish. It was how many students could live in a dwelling. And that kind of born out of that was the family definition. Nationwide, the family definition, state by state, has been upheld in some states and lost in others. And I would say it's about 50-50 nationwide as to the states that have held that the family definition is lawful and states that say it is not lawful and you can't restrict the number of people. It hasn't been tested in Alabama. And I would sincerely hope that we don't test it here. If we do and test it too far, we could end up losing the whole family definition.
Thank you. And I have one more question. You spoke earlier on about the difficulty to enforce STRs with the current ordinance before us that we've been working with. I wonder if you could explain to me the reasoning that the city in 2018 in the Open Line newsletter published the following, where it says, renting or leasing your single family home for less than 6 continuous months is considered a short-term rental and may constitute a use violation or an unrelated occupancy violation in accordance with the city's of Auburn's zoning ordinance. If you are considering renting or leasing your single family residence for football games or any other short-term rental period, please contact the city's planning department to find out if the property is zoned to allow short-term rentals. Wonder if you could just give us an explanation as to how you got there.
Bob, I definitely was not the staff member that drafted that nor put it in Open Line. I was around at the time. My guess was we were getting a lot of push from people. It is true that, there's a push. People that rent short-term right now and what's considered single-family neighborhoods think they're lawful, and their neighbors think they're not lawful. And the truth of the matter is we don't have a law in the books one way or the other. A short-term rental by our definitions, it is less than 180 days, but that's only because a longer term rental is 180 days. So therefore, what went out in open line in my mind was a deterrent, asking people not to do it in a friendly manner. Our ability to actually enforce the law is a different situation. Is we have to catch people in the physical act, not just advertising it on Airbnb, but we actually have to catch non-citizens there who don't own the property, actively renting, not friends staying over, actively renting, and we have to be able to prove it in a court of law, which is very difficult to do, as we've learned with unrelated occupancy, unless we can establish a pattern of behavior. So it is a big challenge for us. If there's a law on the books about short-term rentals that is clear what the rules of engagement are, it's a little bit easier to enforce. I didn't say easy, but a little bit easier. And so my understanding about that going out was to remind people and to nicely ask, you're really not lawful, but I can't say you were illegal, but you're not legal. It's somewhere in between. And that was a very big gray area. And that's why we're here today.
Thank you.
Yep. Anyone else?
Yeah, I've got a question on subletting. I know that being that I do a substantial amount of real estate legal work, I know that subletting is a big portion of the summer activities, whereas someone will have a 12-month lease and potentially go home, a student will, and then rent their property for a month period or less for the fulfillment of the lease. Is this going to cause frustration between our long-term businesses with those summertime sublets or fall, I don't know, anytime, it's sublets in general, I guess.
Allison, do you want to address back to the licensing question? I don't think, as long as they're in the primary business, do you see an issue with that?
No, it would be the same as what we talked about earlier. If it's an apartment complex and they're doing a little bit of the short-term rental type stuff, there would not be an extra license. They would still be remitting through their primary business, which is the residential rental. But they would be expected to remit lodging tax if they are doing that short-term activity.
How about an individual occupying a property in an NC zone for less than a month during the summertime? That would be a violation of this ordinance because it would be a short-term rental as a sublet.
Well, if a sublet is a way around short-term rentals and it's a loophole, it's something we'll have to look at. And that is, 1 month sublets, something that we'll have to look at. The one challenge is that a lot of these sublets, you pointed out NC neighborhoods, a lot of them are I'm not saying they're not going on in NC neighborhoods, but a good bit of them also go on in family definition zones that 5 unrelated are allowed. I did have a staff member just remind me that at the request of the council at the time is why the short-term rental notes went out in open line, that the council was requesting twice a year before people got to leasing things that we give a friendly nudge about, please don't do this. And so that's where that came from. And, unless you can lawfully do it. Back to Bob's question.
Is that something we can get an answer for before? Because I see this bleeding over into some of our established long-term rental product, because there are businesses out there, or there will be tenants who move into a property for 30 days because they're subletting to finish out somebody else's lease. I mean, there's a whole industry here that does that.
You're talking about like in the summertime, Brett, particular?
Oh yeah. I mean, if you've got an NC property that you're renting, or a property that's in an NC zone, and there's a sublet and someone is occupying that property for less than 30 days, that is by definition a short-term rental. And that would be a violation of this proposed ordinance.
Is it a short-term rental because there's a lease? And that's what I don't know. I'd have to get into the weeds.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
because there's a lease, you're just a sublessor, but I also don't want to get into, you can be a sublessor for 48 hours because that is, that's something we'll have to look into, Brett.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, I completely agree. I'm just thinking of, my lawyer brain going, sorry.
Anyone else? All right, so anyone else that has questions, it's 5:39. I mean, if there's some people that would like to continue to ask some questions.
Mayor, if I may.
Sure, Tommy.
My question would be to you, sir, is would it be possible to have a public meeting on this situation and allow X amount of minutes for each citizen to speak that wants to speak and be heard on it? and do it on, sometime we don't have to vote on it the same night. I think that's a disconnect with the public sometimes. We hear it and then 15 minutes later we're voting on it. It's just something it may not be something we can do. I was just throwing it out there.
Yeah. Megan, I've never, since I've been involved, I don't remember us ever doing that, but to answer Tommy's question, is that a tool that could be utilized?
In my experience, it is not. I think you have an advertised public hearing on Tuesday, February 16th. The ordinance will be introduced. If unanimous consent moves through, then you would open the public hearing. At any point in time, once you close the public hearing and the business is on the table, there's a move for approval, which I agree with you can confuse the public if you don't understand Robert's rules. A move for approval in a second just means the business is on the table. You could immediately move to postpone if you needed more time and postpone it to another meeting. Also, if you guys choose to majorly modify this ordinance, you're a minimum of a 4-week delay, which is if you were going to want to make major modifications, we actually have to take a timeout and re-advertise depending on what it is. And the next time it could come back to you is your March 16th meeting if that's something you choose to do. So there's options there in the public hearing, Tommy, to once that's closed and the business is on the table, you could postpone it because you want more time to study something else and you want to gather more information, whichever you want to do.
Well, I agree with what you're saying. I think that may be the thing that I would like to do at that point, and I appreciate your input. And also, I think this thing could be simplified a little bit. I'm not an attorney, but I have a tough time understanding it at this point. And I know if I got a tough time understanding it, some more citizens out there probably have a tough time understanding it. So I would like to see if it's simplified in some ways, and I'd like to hear more from the citizens on it, because right now I got to do some reading myself and research, but I don't have enough information to make a decision on it yet. So I may be worrying the staff to death in the coming weeks, days.
I would encourage y'all that's certainly to be expected. So,
yeah. Mayor, the other thing is you mentioned one other thing. You want to give everybody a chance to speak, Chief, and one of your choices is, and you do not have to do this procedurally, but the council can choose to give everybody an opportunity. You can put a time limit on people during public hearings. You don't have that in your rules right now, but that is something you could choose to do that evening if you want to make sure everybody gets 3 minutes or 5 minutes to say their piece, however you want to do it. I think the important thing is for staff, we can get you as much information as you need. You can postpone this. You can modify it. You can do whichever. Just know if we have to re-advertise, it takes us 22 days per state law if we make major changes. So that likely skips a month if you choose to change it after it's been postponed, which is absolutely fine. Some people will get concerned that we're getting close to football season at that point and rental period. So you take the time that you need and staff will get you what you need to make decisions or not make decisions, however you want to do it.
I just feel like sometimes we give the impression when we vote on it immediately after hearing from it that we really hadn't considered what the public say. I think sometimes if we would postpone it and think about it a little bit longer and go on what we've heard. I know if I was speaking passionately about an ordinance and it affected me like it affects some of these people, I would certainly hope they would wait more than 15, 20 minutes to make a decision after everybody got through talking.
I also think at your pleasure, you can deny unanimous consent. Somebody can, but still request that the mayor open the public hearing that evening, which means it just automatically comes back on March 2nd. That's your other choice.
Thank you, Megan. That's kind of what I needed to know. I appreciate it. Appreciate all your work. Appreciate all the work you've done already on this situation.
All right.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Ms. Connie, do you have another question? Okay. Anyone else have another question? Anyone? Okay. Well, thank you everybody for your time. I'll say for the 5th time, if you've got questions, do not hesitate to contact Megan. She is expecting that, and set aside time for you to continue to ask your own questions. And we'll just kind of see where we are. Let's continue to talk amongst the council. And I appreciate the staff. Megan, thank you for all the staff that's been involved this afternoon. Hope y'all have a good Monday evening. All right, we're
Thank you.
adjourned.